One of the operators suddenly shouted that the detection system had identified the appearance of a 9th-rank demon somewhere within the city. He quickly explained that according to the rank reassessment system, only 4 7th-rank warriors had originally been dispatched there to deal with the 6th-rank demon. But then the operator's voice trembled as he reported that their signals had just vanished completely. The only team currently closest to the 9th-rank demon was the Soul Squad. Hearing this, Tracy trembled with anxiety and determination. She refused to let them walk straight into certain death and immediately ordered that a retreat command be sent. However, the operator shook his head and informed her that it was already too late. They had already departed. He believed the squad had made that decision because a large number of civilians were still trapped in that area and needed protection. When Tracy heard this explanation, she could no longer hold back her emotions and tears began to stream down her face. She slowly stepped away from the console, trying to calm herself while thinking that the national rank demon had not yet appeared there. Deep down, she understood what this meant. The enemy was likely using this attack as a diversion, planning to destroy the checkpoint first and then bring the entire city to ruin. Staring at the large tactical map in front of her, she tried to locate the positions of the Rock Squad and the Yenhai Squad. According to the latest reports, the Yenhai Squad was currently engaged in battle with 2 8th-rank demons and 3 4th-rank demons on one of the city's streets. Meanwhile, the Rock Squad was locked in a fierce fight against 2 7th-rank demons along Central Street. That meant only one combat unit remained available nearby, the Soul Squad. Realizing the danger they were heading into, Tracy broke down again, refusing to accept the possibility that they might die as well. At that same time, Isaac arrived at the detention area where Jasper and Levi were being held. Calmly, he announced that he was releasing them because they possessed the special innate bodies required for Special Forces warriors. He explained that in a moment like this, everyone capable of fighting had a responsibility to stand up and defend the city. Jasper looked confused and suspicious, wondering who this strange man was and why he had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Levi, however, quickly recognized him and said he was the shady guy who had been secretly spying on them. Isaac froze in shock, realizing Levi had sensed his presence the entire time. Trying to regain his composure, Isaac unlocked the door and asked them to come out and help protect the citizens, reminding them that this was the sacred duty of warriors. But just then the security system suddenly announced that he had entered an incorrect authorization code and did not possess the required access rights to open the cell. Levi immediately understood the situation. Without hesitation, he walked up to the metal bars and simply pushed them apart with his bare hands. Isaac stared in complete disbelief as he realized that the two of them had been capable of escaping the prison anytime they wanted. Jasper asked whether they should take the rooster along with them, but Levi calmly replied that the chicken only cared about eating, while their job was to hunt demons. Isaac hurried after them outside, explaining that he was an observer assigned to combat operations and belonged to the reconnaissance unit, so he needed to return to them. However, when he turned his head to look again, he was shocked to discover that the boys had already vanished from sight. Feeling slightly insulted, Isaac muttered to himself that they clearly didn't see him as a real comrade at all. Meanwhile, the battle continued raging in the city streets. Elsa mourned the loss of her beloved pet, while the Special Forces soldiers struggled and suffered heavy losses against the powerful Kitsune. The fox demon laughed coldly, mocking the warriors and saying that 7th-rank fighters were nothing more than weak insects. Just then, a glowing healing pill suddenly flew through the air toward one of the injured warriors. Moments later, members of the Soul Squad arrived at the battlefield. Among them was Morgan from the 8th-rank Higher Buddhist Academy. Looking at the fallen soldiers, he grimly remarked that healing them was pointless. They were already dead. Standing beside him was his partner Lexi from the Higher Academy of Medicine, also a powerful 8th-rank fighter. The fox turned her gaze toward the newly arrived warriors and mockingly asked whether they had also come here simply to die. Soon after, Augustus from the Supreme Taoist Academy appeared on the battlefield, joining his companions. Chung from Manhwa Academy arrived alongside him and immediately activated a sealing technique designed specifically to trap demons. He followed it by calling forth a powerful containment spell known as the Polar Winds Formation. The fox barely managed to leap away at the last second, shouting angrily that humans might be weak, but they were also extremely cunning. In response, she quickly summoned a thick ice shield in front of her, blocking the incoming spells from the warriors. Then, deciding to stop playing around, she launched herself forward, charging directly at the humans while protected by her icy barrier. But as she advanced, she suddenly realized that powerful currents of wind were forming around her from every direction. Seeing that they had a brief moment of safety, Lexi quickly explained that their squad had come here for one purpose: to rescue civilians. She rushed over to Elsa, who was still kneeling beside her fallen pet, and urged the girl to stand up. Taking Elsa firmly by the hand, Lexi pulled her away from the battlefield even though the girl desperately wanted to remain beside Smudge. Elsa cried as she was dragged away, but deep inside she understood that staying there would only lead to her death. Meanwhile, the fox struggled inside the swirling currents of wind that were beginning to trap her movement. With a furious roar, she unleashed a powerful shockwave spell that blasted outward and forced the squad members back. When Lexi turned around, she realized with alarm that their carefully prepared formation had collapsed. She quickly looked back at Elsa again and urgently told her to run as far away as possible. Realizing that these seemingly insignificant 8th rank warriors had actually managed to restrain her for a moment, the fox admitted to herself that she might have underestimated them. With cold anger in her eyes, she immediately prepared a deadly technique called Ice Needle to punish the warriors who dared challenge her. At that instant, Morgan raised his hands and summoned a shining golden dome that surrounded and protected his teammates. Chung reinforced the defense by casting additional spells that intercepted and shattered the incoming ice spears. Leiche rushed forward to assist them, summoning an earthly pill of 9-fold restoration and directing its healing energy toward the injured warrior. But the fox sneered and declared that she would not give them even a moment to recover, activating a terrifying skill known as Frost on Bones. Suddenly, every member of the squad felt an eerie and deeply unpleasant sensation spreading through their bodies, as if an invisible cold was creeping straight into their bones. It was not just ordinary cold. The chill crept deeper and deeper until it felt as if it was seeping straight into their bones, freezing their bodies from the inside out. August and Morgan, who were still protected beneath the golden dome, quickly rushed toward their teammates, who were trembling uncontrollably under the terrible wave of freezing air. Lexi turned back toward them with urgency in her voice and ordered them to leave immediately and focus on rescuing civilians instead of staying here. When the boys finally looked carefully at the demoness again, they suddenly understood what terrifying technique she had just used against them. They watched in disbelief as countless icy snowflakes drifted through the air and slowly passed straight through their protective barrier as if it did not even exist. The fox demon slowly descended a little lower in the sky and mockingly asked them how they liked experiencing her polar blizzard technique. She laughed coldly and said that this was nothing more than the law of nature, natural selection where the weak and unfit were destined to die. At that moment, emergency alarms echoed across the entire city as loudspeakers ordered all civilians to head toward the nearest safe zones and shelters to escape the demon invasion. Meanwhile, Levi and Jasper calmly walked along one of the streets, observing the terrified people who were running everywhere in panic. Suddenly, they ran into Elsa along the road and casually asked her if she needed any help. The moment Elsa realized that 2 warriors were standing before her, a small but powerful spark of hope suddenly appeared in her tear-filled eyes. Without wasting another second, she turned around and urgently told the boys to follow her. Not long after, they reached the battlefield, where the fox demon stood watching with satisfaction as her opponents writhed in pain under the freezing storm. When Lexi saw that Elsa had returned, she angrily scolded her, unable to understand why she would come back here only to risk dying. When the squad members noticed Levi and Jasper arriving without their rooster companion, they immediately assumed these 2 newcomers were walking straight into death. Since the boys no longer had an 8th rank demon supporting them, the squad members desperately shouted at them to run away immediately if they valued their lives. The Kitsune demon laughed softly and said that since they had already come this far, they should not even think about escaping now. Without hesitation, She once again activated her deadly ice needle technique and launched a storm of sharp icicles toward the two boys. The squad members kept yelling at Levi and Jasper to run away, but the boys simply stood where they were without moving. When the icy spears flew dangerously close, Levi suddenly leaped forward and intercepted every single one of them within a single second. The fox stared in shock as this strange man effortlessly caught all of her ice needles, yet she could not sense even the slightest warrior aura coming from him. At that moment, Jasper casually commented that the fox actually had a very cute and fluffy tail, while Levi calmly replied that even though she had a tail, she still looked like a human, so touching her might not be appropriate. Hearing this, the fox screamed in fury, shouting that humans were disgusting and pathetic and that they must stop calling her human. She proudly declared that she was a 9th-rank demon, a polar kitsune. Levi simply shrugged and said that since she was not human after all, he would just take her tail. Jasper asked with curiosity whether removing her tail would hurt, but Levi casually replied that it was only her tail, so she probably would not feel much pain. In the very next instant, Levi vanished from where he stood and appeared directly behind the fox before she could even react. By the time the fox realized what had happened, the only thing left where her tail had been was a bloody wound. Levi calmly returned to Jasper and handed him the fluffy tail. Jasper's eyes lit up with excitement as he admired how big and soft it was. Still, Jasper wondered if cutting off her tail like that had really been the right thing to do. Levi replied casually that once Jasper finished playing with it, they could simply return it and fix it later using acupuncture. The fox demon was shaking with rage and immediately charged toward them with murderous intent. In the blink of an eye, she appeared directly in front of Levi and launched a deadly ice blade attack. The squad members watched in horror, convinced that the newcomer was about to be killed instantly. However, when the swirling blizzard finally cleared, they saw Levi calmly holding the fox's wrist in his hand. The fox realized with growing panic that she could neither escape from his grip nor reach him with her claws, and she had no idea what rank these strange men were. When she noticed that Levi was actually drooling slightly while staring at her, a wave of disgust spread across her face. She angrily called him a filthy and lustful beast before attacking him again with her free hand. But Levi effortlessly grabbed that hand as well and casually asked Jasper whether he thought the fox was cute. Jasper nodded thoughtfully and replied that she did look rather cute, especially her fluffy ears. The demons watching nearby could not understand why the fox's entire body had suddenly begun shaking uncontrollably. Deep inside, she could not accept the terrifying truth that she was actually afraid of this strange man. Levi suddenly threw a punch that shattered her ice shield and sent the fox flying through the air. At the last possible moment, the demon managed to land on her feet and regain her balance. Filled with rage and humiliation, she prepared to attack them again. At this point, only 3 figures remained standing on the battlefield. The protagonist calmly remarked that they needed to return the fox to her original demonic form. The furious demon kept screaming that she would kill this man no matter what. Then she lifted her head and shouted loudly, calling for the alligator demon and asking for his assistance. At that moment, the system suddenly informed the protagonist that a nearby source of food capable of reducing his hunger for 14 weeks had appeared. The system calmly reported that the target was currently 1,000 meters away. But a second later the system suddenly corrected itself and said the distance had become 0 meters, and when the protagonist looked up he saw a massive column of water rushing toward him. He instinctively raised his hand forward, preparing to block the incoming attack. However, this time the defense failed, and watery tentacles wrapped tightly around his arms and legs. The water tendrils lifted him into the air and began violently shaking him back and forth. Soon a gigantic 9th-rank demon alligator stepped out from behind a nearby wall, grinning as he said the fox had admitted she had no rivals below national rank and now needed his help. The fox screamed angrily that if they failed to kill this man, their master's entire plan would completely collapse. The alligator casually walked over to her and wrapped an arm around her waist, calmly saying that defeating this man alone would not be enough, and that they should unite their powers like they had agreed. He added with a grin that his water ability and her ice power were perfectly compatible and invited her to experience the sweet feeling of becoming stronger together. The fox demanded to know why he was so eager to dominate her power, but the alligator laughed and replied that water could always become ice, but ice could never become water again, and he had been waiting a long time for such power. Without waiting for her approval, he suddenly bit into her body. The squad members watched the horrifying scene unfold in shock, while Augustus slowly began to understand what was happening. Suddenly, he remembered the strange drawing he had discovered earlier in the abandoned factory and shouted loudly that they must not allow the demons to unite. But by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. The merging process had begun, and the fox demon's body slowly started fusing together with the alligator's power. Within moments, the transformation completed, and a terrifying new entity appeared before everyone, a rank 10 demon known as the Lord of the Furious Storm. The monstrous being bared its sharp teeth and stared down at the humans with contempt, asking mockingly if these insignificant people had come here only to freeze to death. Suddenly, a massive column of water erupted right in front of the boys. Levi reacted instantly, barely managing to leap backward while pulling Jasper into his arms. But the newly formed demon moved even faster than expected, appearing in front of them again almost instantly. With terrifying speed, the creature lashed out, swinging its powerful tails toward the boys in a violent attack. Jasper could barely understand what was happening around him. While Levi desperately dodged the storm of attacks, the system suddenly activated a powerful defensive ability for him called the Impenetrable Golden Body. Yet even that wasn't enough to slow the demon down. In a flash, it teleported behind Levi and delivered a devastating blow. The system quickly warned Levi that although this demon did not rely on traditional energy cultivation, its raw destructive power was incredibly dangerous. However, it still had one limitation: it could not destroy water itself. The system explained that water was the host's greatest weakness in this situation. Unfortunately, Levi and Jasper were already losing balance and falling straight into the swirling water below. The system urgently advised Levi to avoid water at all costs and dodge any water-based attacks no matter what. As soon as Levi touched the water's surface, Jasper slipped out of his arms and stared at him in confusion. Then Jasper watched in horror as strange watery hands rose from the depths and dragged Levi down into the dark abyss. The demon laughed loudly, announcing that the fight was already over for them. It then used a powerful ability called Watery Grave, trapping both boys deep inside a massive prison of water. Levi quickly struggled to stand and began tearing away the watery restraints that clung to his body and prevented him from moving. Then he heard Jasper's voice nearby and immediately turned toward him with concern. Jasper said that he couldn't move at all, so Levi immediately told him not to worry because he would help him escape. Jasper's hands trembled as he clutched the fluffy fox tail he had taken earlier. In the next moment, they suddenly realized that the water around them had frozen solid, sealing them both inside a thick capsule of ice. Levi's anger immediately flared. The system urgently warned him that he must break the ice coffin quickly before the oxygen inside completely ran out. Meanwhile, the story shifted to the demon containment chamber where the rooster had been imprisoned earlier. But now he barely resembled a bird at all. Instead, he looked like a strange man with bird-like features and scattered feathers across his body. At first, he didn't even notice that he was trapped inside a cage. But when the rooster finally realized where he was, anger immediately filled his mind. He blamed Levi and Jasper for locking him inside a demonic cage like he was nothing more than an ordinary chicken. In frustration, he shook his arms, and to his own surprise, the heavy cage flew apart as if it weighed nothing. The rooster stared in disbelief, realizing he had broken free effortlessly. Only then did he notice that his body had changed completely. His wings were gone, and instead he now looked almost entirely human. Terrified, the rooster cried out that he had turned into a hairless monkey. However, as he moved his body, he soon realized that along with this strange transformation, he had gained incredible strength. In the end, he decided that his appearance no longer mattered. If becoming a freak gave him this level of power, then it was simply the price every 9th-rank demon had to pay. He declared that if enduring such a terrible form allowed him to destroy those monsters, he would gladly accept it, because the power of a ninth-rank demon could bring true justice. He swore that he would take revenge on the two monsters who had tormented him for so long. With that determination, the rooster activated his ability of rapid flight and immediately rushed into the sky. He flew across the city searching for his enemies, but everywhere he looked he only saw frightened civilians running for their lives. Levi and Jasper were nowhere to be seen. Then he noticed something unusual. In one part of the city, powerful waves of demonic energy were colliding violently. He was certain the two boys must be fighting there. Without hesitation, he changed direction and sped toward that location, determined to help them. Meanwhile, chaos had erupted at headquarters as workers reported that the energy waves of a third ninth-rank demon had suddenly appeared. Tracy was horrified. Not only had the signals of two ninth-rank demons vanished earlier, but now another ninth-rank demon had appeared, and on top of that, even stronger energy waves belonging to a rank 10 demon were now detected. Fearing that their city might be doomed, she urgently asked the operators if they could still contact the Soul Squad. One of the workers replied that communication with two warriors from that squad was still active. Since they had reached the battlefield, the connection had never been lost. He explained that those two warriors were actually responsible for eliminating the earlier ninth-rank demons. And now, according to the readings, they were currently facing a terrifying 10th-rank demon. Tracy immediately ordered their information to be displayed on the screen. When the data appeared, Tracy was shocked to see that the fighters were actually the same newcomers from Squad 666, and their 8th-rank demon companion was also present. For a moment, Tracy completely forgot that those same people had previously been arrested and locked in prison. But then one of the operators suddenly reported that the prison cells were empty and that all three of them had escaped. He added that their 8th-rank demon had also escaped earlier. However, a moment later, the system suddenly detected that this third 9th-rank demon also had a signal. The identification number matched the 8th-rank demon that belonged to Squad 666. Everyone in the room stared in disbelief. Somehow that demon had broken through to the 9th rank and had rushed to the battlefield to help his masters. Meanwhile, the rooster finally arrived at the battlefield where the intense fight was taking place. The warriors from the squad immediately felt the terrifying energy waves of another 9th rank demon approaching and froze in fear. However, a moment later they realized that the newcomer was actually their familiar companion, the rooster. The remaining squad members were filled with relief and excitement when they understood that he had broken through to the 9th rank and had come to save his masters. The storm demon turned toward the rooster and asked suspiciously if he was another traitor. The rooster firmly replied that he was not. Pointing toward the frozen ice coffin, he declared that he had come here to kill the two monsters trapped inside. The Stormlord laughed mockingly and asked how exactly he planned to accomplish that. Without hesitation, the rooster leaped forward and rushed straight toward the ice coffin, shouting that he would handle it himself. But suddenly he noticed a sharp ice arrow flying directly toward him. His reflexes were fast enough to dodge it easily. Annoyed, he shouted at the Stormlord that they were supposed to be allies and that he had nearly killed him. The demon scoffed and called him a disgusting traitor, assuming that the rooster was pretending in order to free the two humans trapped in the ice. The rooster puffed out his chest and crowed loudly, insisting once again that he truly was not a traitor. At that exact moment, the demon suddenly lunged forward with frightening speed, his eyes burning with curiosity and suspicion as he demanded to know just how much faith humans truly placed in demons like him. Meanwhile, the rooster had drifted into deep thought for a brief second, his mind racing through possibilities, and he nearly failed to notice the sudden strike coming from the other rooster charging toward him. The Stormlord continued speaking calmly, explaining that the four warriors had looked relieved the instant they saw him arrive, clearly believing he had come to rescue their masters. Yet despite that assumption, he kept insisting again and again that he was no traitor to their kind. Only then did the squad members slowly realize the terrible mistake they had made. The rooster had been trying to win the demon's trust through careful deception, but their sudden violent reaction had completely ruined his plan. The rooster suddenly let out a loud crow and declared that he was not a traitor at all. Instead, he boldly claimed that his true goal was to become a demon powerful enough to devour humanity itself. Hearing such words, The Stormlord couldn't help but let out a low, amused chuckle, clearly entertained by the rooster's dramatic declaration. He narrowed his eyes and said he could still sense traces of a warrior's aura clinging to the rooster's body, and to him that lingering scent was absolutely revolting. Without wasting another moment, he rushed toward the rooster once again and pointed out mockingly that the bird also wore a collar around his neck, just like a restrained beast. The Stormlord coldly added that if the rooster truly wished to prove he was not a traitor, then he should simply die here. Only then would the demon consider believing him. Right after saying that, the Stormlord leapt backward with sudden agility and summoned chains of water that wrapped around the rooster, trapping him inside what looked like a suffocating watery grave. The rooster instantly realized that the demon had no intention of sparing him. Understanding that death was approaching, he quickly decided to rely on his extraordinary ability of high-speed flight. But the moment he tried to escape, he discovered that the crushing grip of the surrounding water was far stronger than he had expected, holding him tightly in place. The demon roared as he unleashed a terrifying technique known as the hexagonalized coffin. In response, the rooster hurriedly summoned a powerful wall of water to shield himself. The Stormlord burst into laughter, mocking the effort as he sarcastically asked whether the rooster seriously thought water could stop someone like him. To him, the entire situation looked almost ridiculous, like a desperate and pointless struggle. Ignoring the mockery, the rooster activated another one of his abilities, unleashing a deadly technique known as the shower of needles. The Stormlord only laughed louder when he saw that the rooster continued to attack him using water-type abilities. With clear arrogance, he declared that he himself was the most powerful water-type demon there was, and such attacks were completely useless against him. At that moment, the rooster suddenly switched tactics and activated a different skill entirely, a technique known as electric arc. In the very next instant, violent lightning surged through the battlefield, piercing the Stormlord's entire body with crackling energy. The demon collapsed to the ground, realizing that the rooster had cleverly used the water wall and the needle attack to conduct electricity through the battlefield and shock him. However, after only a brief moment, he lifted his head again and began laughing loudly, claiming that such a trick was still far from enough to defeat him. In a sudden blur of movement, he appeared directly in front of the rooster, preparing to deliver a killing blow. But the rooster reacted just in time and activated the Titanic shell to shield his body. Right after that, the Stormlord unleashed a terrifying technique that he had gained after fusing with the fox demon. The rooster had not expected such a sudden and powerful strike and had no chance to dodge it. The force of the attack was so overwhelming that it sent him crashing violently to the ground. The Stormlord admitted that the rooster was impressively strong for a 9th-rank demon. Still, he sneered and said that he was nothing more than a demon bird with several abilities, but very little real combat experience. From the Stormlord's perspective, the rooster's death was already inevitable. It was simply a matter of time. But at that critical moment, the rooster chose to activate another hidden ability known as intimidating pressure. The Stormlord suddenly felt a strange and oppressive sensation creeping over him, forcing him to instinctively step backward. Seizing the opportunity, the rooster used his deep-sea breathing skill, and a massive phantom of a water whale suddenly formed above them. The Stormlord looked genuinely confused, unable to understand how a demon bird could possibly possess the innate ability of a deep-sea demon. The enormous water whale crashed down onto the demon, striking him with tremendous force and sending sharp pain through his head. The rooster crowed loudly and tried to explain that he had only intended to kill those two specific people. It was the demon lord who had attacked him first, leaving him no choice but to defend himself. But the Stormlord had no interest in listening to explanations. With cold determination, he rushed forward again, clearly intending to kill his fellow demon. Watching from the sidelines, the squad members stared in horror as the fight intensified, realizing that the rooster would not be able to evade the next attack. Yet at the very last second, the rooster managed to activate his evil eye ability, briefly stunning the Stormlord. For a moment, the demon found himself trapped inside a strange and incomprehensible dimension where shadows of monstrous creatures slowly circled around him, making him realize he had fallen into a powerful illusion. When the illusion suddenly shattered, he returned to his senses only to see, with horror, that the rooster had already sliced off his hand in a single swift strike. The demon dropped to his knees, shocked and breathing heavily, admitting that the rooster was far stronger than he had expected. He even acknowledged that the rooster possessed an incredible variety of abilities, making him unmatched among ninth-rank demons. However, the very next moment, he charged forward again and reminded the rooster that no matter what, he himself was still a 10th-rank demon. With brutal speed, he stabbed the rooster's leg using a sharp thorn that had grown out from his damaged hand. Using his remaining arm, he lunged directly toward the rooster, attempting to seize him by the head. But in a single swift movement, the rooster swung his blade and severed the demon's head. The squad members watched the shocking scene with wide eyes, believing in horror that their rooster companion had just died. Yet moments later, the Stormlord slowly stood up again and admitted that the rooster had indeed been very powerful with all those natural abilities. In fact, he almost felt regret that the bird had crossed his path. As he turned to leave the battlefield, he suddenly heard movement behind him. To his surprise, the rooster had stood up again and used a mantis-derived ability to regenerate his severed head. The Stormlord turned around with visible astonishment as he realized that his opponent had somehow come back to life. The rooster himself understood that without the ability called Second Head, which he had acquired from another demon, he truly would have died just moments ago. Still, he knew that if this head were cut off as well, then there would be no saving him. It was clear to him now that this 10th-rank demon was incredibly powerful and absolutely determined to kill him. Realizing that there was no escape, the rooster made up his mind. Either he would kill the Stormlord here, or he himself would die. With that resolve, he rushed forward to attack. The rooster activated another dangerous ability known as the 6 Shadow Sights. With frightening speed, he began launching relentless attacks toward the Stormlord using all 6 of his clawed limbs. The demon simply laughed again, mocking him and calling him nothing more than a pitiful chicken. Then the Stormlord launched his counterattack, driving sharp spikes directly into the rooster's stomach. After landing that brutal strike, he followed up by kicking the rooster with tremendous force, sending him flying across the battlefield. Although the impact was extremely powerful, the rooster managed to regain his balance and land on his feet, reminding himself that his opponent was still a terrifying 10th-rank demon. Soon after, the two demons clashed once more, their battle raging fiercely across the battlefield. The Stormlord was genuinely astonished that such a small 9th-rank rooster could continue resisting him, a powerful demon who stood at the 10th rank. The rooster clearly realized that he had reached the limit of what he could endure. Facing the overwhelming might of the Stormlord, he understood deep down that he had no real chance of surviving this clash. The violent storm raged around him, and in that moment he quietly accepted that his end was approaching faster than he had ever expected. When he slowly forced his eyes open again, his vision blurred for a moment before sharpening. What he saw made the entire battlefield feel eerily quiet. Delicate snowflakes had begun drifting down from the dark sky above, falling softly despite the chaos that surrounded them. But those snowflakes were far from harmless. In the very next instant, they struck his body with terrifying force, piercing through his flesh like countless razor-sharp thorns. It felt as though thousands of needles stabbed into him all at once, each impact sending waves of agony throughout his body. The Stormlord staggered slightly, and suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. Wiping his lips, he muttered with disbelief that this demon had pushed him so far that he had actually been forced to unleash one of his deadly finishing moves. Yet something felt terribly wrong. He could not understand what exactly was happening inside his body. A deep, unbearable pain spread through him, and he realized that blood was pouring from multiple wounds all over his body without stopping. When he glanced down at the ground beneath him, he noticed something strange mixed within the dark puddle of his own blood. There was a faint green substance swirling through it. Only then did he realize the truth. It was one of the rooster's abilities, a toxic attack known as poison spit. The Stormlord's eyes widened with horror and fury. Grinding his teeth, he swore that for daring to poison him like this, he would personally tear that rooster apart piece by piece until nothing remained. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the chaotic battlefield, the protagonist was still struggling desperately. Water tentacles had wrapped themselves tightly around his arms and legs, squeezing and pulling as if trying to drag him deeper into an icy prison. At that moment, the system's calm voice echoed inside his mind. According to its calculations, he still had roughly 10 seconds left to break free from the frozen coffin trapping him. But there was a cruel twist. His friend Jasper only had enough oxygen left to survive for 5 seconds. The system explained that he had two possible choices. He could continue focusing entirely on escaping the ice coffin right now, or he could abandon the current situation and move to another location to grow stronger before returning later. However, there was a harsh reality tied to that decision. Only if he chose the second option, leaving temporarily to become stronger, would there be any chance at all to eventually save Jasper's life. Without hesitating for even a moment, the protagonist made his decision. He chose the option that would allow his friend to survive, even if it meant abandoning the immediate battle. Right after that choice was made, the system calmly informed him that the flow of time in this world had been completely frozen. Everything around him stopped, and he himself began transitioning to a different location entirely. The system soon revealed the details of his new mission. The target of his task would be a man named Fabian, a descendant of an ancient fire deity. Levi's responsibility would be to guide this man back toward the correct path. Before long, Levi felt himself awaken inside an unfamiliar body. When he slowly opened his eyes, the first thing he saw were two frightened girls standing in front of him. Their clothes were badly torn, bruises covered their skin, and tears streamed down their faces as they desperately begged him, promising they would behave obediently from now on. Their bodies trembled violently as they spoke, their voices shaking with fear. They repeatedly swore that they would never attempt to escape from this place again, clearly terrified of whatever punishment they expected. Levi blinked in confusion, feeling completely stunned. Somehow, once again, he had ended up inside someone else's body, placed into a situation he did not yet understand. With trembling hands, the two girls nervously held out a whip and offered it to him, as if expecting punishment to follow. Meanwhile, the main character could only stare in bewilderment, having absolutely no idea what was going on. Suddenly, a flood of unfamiliar memories surged into his mind. In this body, his name was Fabian. From what those memories revealed, this man had done many terrible things, exactly the kind of behavior the director had repeatedly warned him never to commit. Just then, the office door opened, and another man stepped inside. It was Victor, the head of personal security and Fabian's loyal bodyguard. He calmly explained that they needed to talk because Daryl was already waiting for them at the negotiation table. Fabian moved quickly, and within only a second he had already reached the office door, preparing to step out. Before leaving, he turned toward Victor and remarked that the two women inside the office looked badly injured and were barely clothed. Victor misunderstood completely, casually commenting that the women were probably too old for the boss anyway, and that next time they should find younger ones. Hearing that, Fabian immediately gave a simple order. He told his bodyguard to send the two women safely back to their homes. Afterward, the bodyguard followed him into another room and handed him a very expensive suit. He respectfully explained that his boss should probably wear it for the important meeting scheduled today. Once everything was ready, Fabian stepped outside with several bodyguards accompanying him. One of the men mentioned that, according to their information, the mysterious Eighth Authority had also been invited to the meeting, but Fabian seemed completely indifferent to that fact. Victor couldn't help but grin when he noticed Fabian's calm reaction. He commented that their boss didn't even seem bothered by the presence of the Eighth Authority, which honestly felt exactly like the kind of fearless attitude they expected from him. Soon they arrived beside an expensive luxury car waiting outside. One of the guards quickly stepped forward and respectfully opened the door for their boss. Fabian calmly climbed into the vehicle and, surprisingly, thanked Victor for opening the door for him. Victor froze in place for a moment, completely stunned. He couldn't understand why the boss had suddenly become so polite. For a second, he even wondered if he had somehow done something wrong. As the car began moving toward the meeting location, Victor spoke up again. He explained that Daryl had invited several authorities in order to pressure them into surrendering the land, and he cautiously asked whether the boss planned to insult him during the negotiations. Another bodyguard quickly added that they absolutely could not hand over that land. Too many of their own people had already died fighting to protect it. But his partner responded that Daryl had extremely powerful connections, and provoking someone like him could be dangerous. Despite the tension, the bodyguards secretly felt excited. Watching their boss remain so calm and unbothered, even with the Eighth Authority involved, made them believe this was exactly how a true leader should behave. Meanwhile, Fabian was lost in his own thoughts. He worried that, just like last time, he had been thrown into another world without his friend Jasper. The thought made him feel heavy with sadness. Then the system's voice reminded him that the only way to save Jasper was to finish the mission here, guiding the current Fabian back onto the right path. After thinking about it for a moment, he suddenly turned to one of his bodyguards and casually asked if he knew what the phrase, "the true path," actually meant. The man hesitated before answering that it probably meant becoming a good and righteous person. The bodyguards exchanged puzzled looks, once again realizing that they could never truly understand what strange thoughts were running through their boss's mind. Before long, their car finally arrived in front of an extremely luxurious restaurant. Victor quickly stepped forward and opened the car door, allowing his boss to step out. Then he turned toward the entrance and loudly called out, demanding to know what Daryl thought he was doing. He angrily questioned why Daryl had brought so many people to the negotiation when they had previously agreed that each side would only bring a small group. Victor sarcastically suggested that since Daryl now had the support of the Eighth Authority, he felt confident enough to use such arrogant methods. Turning to Fabian, he added that he and the others could easily handle the situation. However, Fabian calmly raised his hand to stop them. He told his bodyguards there was no need for that kind of trouble, because everything was completely fine. The bodyguards found it hard to believe, seeing so many large and intimidating men gathered inside. They couldn't understand how Fabian could simply walk in alone without concern. Yet when they looked at his expression, they noticed something remarkable. Not even the slightest muscle on his face moved. That calm confidence instantly earned their deep respect. As they followed behind him, Fabian's bodyguards couldn't help reflecting on the fact that they had always admired their boss. But today, he had managed to surprise them once again. They soon reached the entrance of the restaurant itself, where Victor stepped ahead and pushed the door open wide for Fabian. Inside, several men were already seated around a table. When they saw Fabian finally arrive, a few of them let out mocking chuckles. Among those men sat Daryl himself. He casually waved his hand toward Fabian, inviting him to come over and take a seat. Everyone expected Fabian to sit directly across from Daryl like a normal negotiation partner. Instead, he calmly walked over and sat right beside him. Daryl quietly cursed under his breath. He had hidden a weapon beneath the desk in front of him, but now Fabian's unexpected seating position made that weapon completely useless. Even the representative of the Eighth Authority looked confused. He stared at Fabian with clear suspicion, unsure what kind of strange move this was. Based on their past negotiations, he knew Fabian was usually aggressive and confrontational. That was why the current situation felt incredibly strange to him. Daryl himself began to wonder if Fabian had somehow discovered the hidden weapon under the table. Then the main character suddenly spoke up and casually asked if someone could bring him something to eat because he was extremely hungry. A short while later, waiters arrived carrying a large plate piled high with delicious food and carefully placed it in front of him. Everyone at the table stared in disbelief. They couldn't believe Fabian had actually come to this tense meeting just to sit there and enjoy a meal while gang conflicts were supposed to be happening. After finishing most of the food, the protagonist politely thanked Daryl for preparing such a generous table. Meanwhile, Daryl could hardly believe that Fabian had spent the entire negotiation simply eating. The men around the table watched in stunned silence as their guest calmly continued eating every dish placed before him. Before long, every single plate on the table had been completely cleared. Once Daryl confirmed that Fabian was finally full, he cleared his throat and said they could now begin the actual negotiations. However, at that exact moment, Fabian suddenly stood up from his seat. Daryl immediately assumed that this was Fabian's way of showing he had no intention of negotiating at all, and that he definitely wasn't planning to give up the land. After finishing his meal and saying his piece, Fabian calmly pushed back his chair and started walking toward the exit. His relaxed attitude only made things worse. Daryl suddenly shot to his feet, his patience completely gone. With an angry glare, he pulled out a gun and aimed it straight at Fabian's back, demanding that he stop and explain himself. Was he planning to give up the land or not? The moment the weapon appeared, Victor and the rest of Fabian's bodyguards reacted instantly. In perfect coordination, they drew their own guns and aimed them directly at Daryl. The once quiet restaurant suddenly filled with tension, as several weapons were now pointed in different directions. Daryl's voice trembled with frustration as he spoke. He reminded everyone that even the Eighth Authority had personally arrived today to witness the negotiations. Yet Fabian was acting as if none of it mattered, and was simply walking away like the whole meeting was a joke. But the truth was that Fabian genuinely didn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal out of it. From his perspective, he had already eaten, said thanks, and there was nothing left to discuss. Without showing the slightest fear, the one-eyed man continued toward the exit. As he walked away, he casually thanked Daryl again for the warm hospitality and the delicious meal, as if the tense standoff behind him didn't exist. Daryl's face turned red with rage. He shouted that he would shoot him right there if he kept acting like this. Fabian simply shrugged and calmly replied that yes, getting shot would probably hurt quite a bit, but the bullet still wouldn't really harm him. Daryl clenched his teeth and insisted that he absolutely had the courage to pull the trigger if he needed to. Hearing that, Fabian slowly turned around. A faint smile appeared on his face as he looked straight at Daryl and quietly told him to go ahead and shoot. Yet despite his threats, Daryl couldn't bring himself to fire. His hands started trembling, and sweat formed on his forehead. Something about Fabian's calm confidence made him feel strangely afraid. In the end, Daryl lowered the gun. The fight had already been decided without a single shot fired. Feeling completely humiliated, he turned away and walked toward the exit, admitting defeat without saying another word. As Fabian reached the doorway, the Eighth Authority finally spoke up. With a thoughtful expression, he commented that for someone so young, Fabian was surprisingly bold and fearless. However, Fabian didn't seem interested in hearing praise or criticism. He simply waved casually, thanked everyone again for their wonderful hospitality, and continued heading toward the exit. The Eighth Authority's face darkened with anger. Being ignored so openly in front of others felt like a direct insult to his position and reputation. Soon after, one of his aides quietly informed him of another problem. Both Fabian and Daryl had already left the restaurant without paying for the meal. That meant the Eighth Authority was now the only person left responsible for the entire expensive banquet. Not long later, Fabian and his bodyguards returned to their car. As they got inside, the men couldn't hide their admiration. The way their boss had handled the negotiations, calm, fearless, and completely unfazed, had left them deeply impressed. Meanwhile, Fabian leaned back in his seat, thinking quietly. He couldn't help imagining that if Jasper had been there with him, his friend would probably have had a lot of fun messing with those men in that tense room. Breaking the silence, Fabian asked Victor where they were headed next. Victor explained that there was still one task left for the day. Fabian was supposed to deliver a final ultimatum to an orphanage that had been refusing their demands. A short time later, their car arrived in front of the flower orphanage. One of the bodyguards proudly said that their previous efforts had gone well, and that soon the entire area would belong to them. Just then, a small child carefully peeked out from behind the orphanage doors. The boy's curious eyes widened when he saw the intimidating group of men standing outside. The moment he recognized them, the child screamed loudly and ran back inside. He shouted for the director to come quickly, warning everyone that the bad guys had arrived again. Soon an elderly woman stepped outside into the small courtyard in front of the orphanage. Several frightened children hid behind her, clinging to her clothes as they trembled. Tears rolled down the woman's face as she spoke. She explained helplessly that this was only an old, crumbling orphanage and that she herself did not have much time left to live. All she wanted, she said, was to give these poor children a place to sleep and grow up safely. With a trembling voice, she begged them to please leave the orphanage alone. Fabian listened quietly and then calmly asked her a simple question. Did she need help? Looking around at the broken buildings and poor conditions, Fabian commented that the place was in terrible shape, even worse than what he had seen elsewhere. He mentioned that living in such an environment could seriously affect the children's mental development. Hearing those words, the woman grew even more frightened. She thought Fabian was trying to trick her somehow, and that he might be planning something terrible for the children. But Fabian simply continued speaking calmly. In his opinion, he said, fixing this place properly would require a large amount of money. The woman cried even harder. She admitted that she truly had no money at all, but she still refused to sell the orphanage. Without this place, the children would have nowhere to live. Fabian then turned toward Victor and told him to bring some money. He explained that they would help repair the orphanage instead. After everything was settled, the group returned to their car. Confused, the bodyguards asked Fabian why he had suddenly decided to donate money to the orphanage. Fabian simply answered that he was trying to become a good person. Meanwhile, something else was happening back at Fabian's office. Two subordinates dragged in a captured man, explaining that he had broken the organization's rules by trying to escape. According to their code, that meant he had to be punished. One of the men added that their boss had personally dealt with people like this for the past 3 years. Soon they would bring the prisoner directly to him for judgment. The captured man turned pale with terror when he heard this. All he could do now was wait for what he believed would surely be his death. After untying him, they dragged the exhausted man down the hallway toward the boss's office. When they reached the room, they threw him roughly onto the floor and announced that they had brought a traitor. Then they asked Fabian what punishment he wanted to give. Fabian looked at the man with visible confusion, clearly unsure how he was supposed to respond to the situation. As he studied the prisoner more closely, he noticed the man's body was covered in deep bruises and cuts. Fabian frowned and asked whether his men had beaten him. He walked closer and told the injured man to stand up. At the same time, he thought to himself that if Jasper were here, his friend could probably help treat those wounds with his special acupuncture needles. The man immediately began explaining himself in a panic. He said he never intended to betray anyone. On the day he was supposed to carry out the task, his mother suddenly collapsed beside him. He had no choice but to rush her to the hospital. Fabian listened carefully and then asked what illness his mother had. With a broken voice, the man replied that the doctors had diagnosed her with leukemia. The man burst into tears and begged Fabian not to harm his mother. She was seriously ill and didn't have much time left. He only asked for a little time to stay with her, promising that afterward he would accept any punishment, even death. One of Fabian's subordinates watched the scene with cold indifference. He had secretly been working undercover here for 3 years and had already learned how ruthless the criminal world could be. In his experience, Fabian never cared about anyone, not even his own allies. But what happened next shocked everyone. Fabian ordered his bodyguards to go to the hospital and take bone marrow tests to find a possible donor for the man's mother. He even promised to cover the full cost of her treatment. Victor shook his head and quietly told the others they were fools. In his opinion, the boss wasn't helping at all. He was probably planning to punish the man through his mother as a warning to everyone. Victor even muttered that this time Fabian might not spare the poor woman either. The other bodyguards nodded in agreement. To them, Victor's explanation sounded completely logical. Meanwhile, one of Fabian's subordinates sat inside a bathroom stall, ignoring the other customers knocking on the door and asking him to leave. That man turned out to be Santiago, a police officer who had been working undercover in Fabian's organization for 3 years. He had just received a message saying the delivery had arrived, but he replied that nothing had reached him and asked the sender to call him back. Santiago simply couldn't believe Fabian would suddenly show kindness. After witnessing so many brutal killings carried out by Fabian's men, he refused to believe the boss would actually spare someone's life now. Fabian was extremely careful and unpredictable. The one-eyed man always seemed to know more than others realized. Santiago thought that if the upcoming raid succeeded, maybe he would finally be able to return home. Meanwhile, the captured man began to suspect something terrible. He feared Fabian might not help his mother at all and might actually harm her. No matter how much he begged Fabian to stop, the boss simply ignored him. Before long, they all arrived at the hospital. It soon became clear that one of the nurses there was also working undercover. She quietly whispered to Santiago that the target was inside. Even one of the doctors was secretly cooperating with them. Each of them wore small earpieces so they could communicate quietly without attracting attention. Fabian looked at the prisoner and said that he looked terrible in his current condition. If he wanted to meet his mother, he should at least change into proper clothes. That was why they had prepared a clean and elegant white suit for him to wear. When he finally reached his mother's hospital room, The nurse explained that family members were only allowed to speak to the patient through a telephone connected to the isolation ward. The man picked up the phone and said softly that he had finally arrived. At the same time, the nurse quietly informed the team through her earpiece that everything was ready and she was waiting for the signal. When the woman saw her son through the glass, tears filled her eyes with joy. The man also began crying, telling her that he should have listened to her advice long ago. He admitted with regret that his life had taken the wrong path. Now he had no way to change it. He gently told her that his company was sending him on a long business trip, but no matter what, they would meet again someday. Fabian turned toward the trembling man and spoke in a calm, steady voice. Since the man worked for his company, Fabian said, he had no intention of sending him away anywhere. Especially now, with his mother's health in such a fragile state, forcing him to travel or leave would be completely heartless. Instead, Fabian told him something unexpected. From now on, he should stay close to his mother and spend as much time with her as possible. While doing that, he should also focus on receiving proper treatment and getting his own life back on track. The man froze for a moment, unable to believe what he had just heard. Then the emotions overwhelmed him. Crying uncontrollably, he rushed forward and embraced Fabian, thanking him over and over again for forgiving him. Fabian gently patted the man on the back, trying to calm him down. Behind them, the bodyguards watched the scene in disbelief. At the same time, the undercover agents quietly reported through their earpieces that they had lost their main target. Since everything had changed unexpectedly, they were now forced to withdraw. Not long after that, reporters began gathering outside the hospital. One of them announced on live television that a surprisingly long line of volunteers had appeared that day, all waiting patiently to undergo bone marrow testing and possibly donate. What made the situation even more surprising was that these volunteers were reportedly employees from the largest real estate company in the entire city. Victor himself later spoke to the reporters and gave a short interview. He explained that the whole donation campaign had been organized personally by their boss, more precisely, by the chairman of their company. Daryl happened to hear this news report and was completely stunned. As if that wasn't shocking enough, he also learned that Fabian had donated a large sum of money the day before to rebuild an old orphanage. He could hardly believe his ears. Soon afterward, another reporter announced that she had personally traveled to the orphanage the company claimed to be helping. She intended to verify whether the donation was real. Deep down, she suspected the whole story was just a publicity stunt and wanted to expose the organization's hypocrisy. She approached the elderly woman who managed the orphanage and directly asked whether the company had truly donated money. To the reporter's surprise, the woman calmly confirmed that the funds had indeed been delivered. When Daryl later discovered that the donation amounted to $50 million, his face turned red with anger. Hearing such an enormous number made him furious beyond belief. Meanwhile, when Fabian finally found himself alone, he decided to examine the computer that belonged to the previous owner of this body. As he browsed through the files, he quickly realized that the former Fabian had been involved in countless terrible activities. Inside the computer were dozens of folders, many of them containing disturbing videos. Several of them showed scenes of brutal murders. Seeing those recordings made Fabian pause. He couldn't help thinking that if Jasper were standing here beside him right now, he would probably be terrified by what he saw. But then Fabian remembered Jasper's strange hobby of calmly using acupuncture needles even in stressful situations, and that thought made him dismiss the fear almost immediately. Soon his mind shifted to a bigger question. How could someone who had committed so many terrible acts possibly return to the right path? Suddenly, he remembered the director once telling him that if he ever faced a serious problem, he should contact the police. Following that advice, Fabian picked up the phone and called the police station directly. When the operator answered, he asked a very unusual question: how someone who had worked with criminals and committed bad deeds could return to the right path. After listening carefully, the operator explained that when crimes had been committed, the only proper solution was for the person responsible to face legal punishment. According to her, accepting punishment under the law was the very first step a criminal needed to take if they truly wanted to change their life. She added that honestly confessing to one's crimes showed genuine sincerity. If he had done anything illegal, she strongly recommended turning himself in as soon as possible, since confession could sometimes reduce the final sentence. After ending the call, Fabian asked Victor to come into the room. With a serious expression, he announced that he had decided he wanted to become a good person. He calmly explained that this was exactly why he had just contacted the police station. Victor's eyes widened in complete shock when he heard those words. Fabian continued explaining that the police operator had told him something important. If someone had committed crimes, the best thing they could do was confess and turn themselves in. And since all of them had been involved in those activities, his bodyguards should probably do the same. After saying that, Fabian looked at Victor and asked him sincerely what he thought about the idea. Victor initially wanted to say that such a drastic step seemed unnecessary. But suddenly a different thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the boss was secretly testing his loyalty. So instead of disagreeing, Victor quickly nodded and said that the boss was thinking in the right direction. No matter what decision Fabian made, he would always support him and follow him anywhere. Then Fabian gave another unexpected order. He told Victor to prepare a large dinner for all the company members tomorrow and quietly mix a sleeping pill into every dish. Victor took this as another test of loyalty. Determined to prove himself through action, he promised Fabian that he would carry out the plan perfectly and never disappoint him. When the company's employees heard that the boss was inviting everyone to a special meal the next day, they became extremely excited. But Santiago felt uneasy. He couldn't understand why Fabian would suddenly gather so many people together just to eat. Something about the situation felt suspicious to him. Later, Santiago quietly went to the garden and met with another undercover agent. He explained that this time every member of the organization would be present. The other agent reminded him that he had said the exact same thing during their previous attempt. Yet even after using their most powerful resources, they had still failed to capture anything useful. He added that if this situation continued, it would become extremely difficult for him to explain the repeated failures to their superiors. Santiago sighed and reminded him that he had spent 3 full years undercover in this dangerous environment. During that time, he had sacrificed everything: his friends, his girlfriend, even his beloved dog. At this point, he didn't even have anyone left he could truly talk to about his feelings. The other agent apologized, saying that all of this sacrifice was being made in the name of justice. Once they finished the mission, Santiago could return to the police force, get his dog back, adopt a cat, and even find a new girlfriend. But Santiago shook his head. None of that mattered to him right now. The only reason he had endured 3 years in this place was to make sure Fabian and his men would finally face justice. He trusted his instincts. This time, he believed they would definitely succeed in catching Fabian. And someday he would see these criminals finally receive the punishment they deserved. Before long, the day of the banquet arrived. All the company employees gathered at the restaurant, excited and ready to turn the evening into a lively celebration. One of the men quickly became loud and drunk. Looking around, he complained angrily that all the waiters in the restaurant were men and began demanding that female waitresses be brought in instead. The restaurant manager politely explained that the female staff were taking a self-care day and hadn't come to work. For tonight, only male waiters were available. But the man refused to accept that explanation and kept insisting on female service. The manager forced himself to remain calm while repeating that the situation was beyond his control. In truth, he was thinking that the women had simply refused to serve such unpleasant customers. Annoyed by the explanation, the man suddenly grabbed the manager by the collar and said the excuse sounded completely ridiculous. He raised his fist, preparing to punch the poor manager. But just as he was about to strike, Fabian appeared behind him and calmly grabbed his arm, stopping the attack.